Welcome back to the long-term series, The Values-Driven Life at Home and Work, Episode 2 in the series, representing a further evolution in the continuing broadcasts featuring Richard Barrett and the work of the Barrett Values Centre. Our panellist today, Richard Barrett, Chairman and Founder of the Barrett Values Centre, Maureen Watson of the UK Values Alliance, and Danae Johnson of Thinking Partners in Vancouver. Richard Barrett is an author, speaker, and internationally recognised thought leader on the evolution of human values in business and society. He's the founder and chairman of the Barrett Values Centre, a fellow of the World Business Academy, member of the Wisdom Council of the Centre for Integral Wisdom, honorary board member of the Spirit of Humanity Forum, and former values coordinator at the World Bank. He's also been a visiting lecturer at the Consulting and Coaching for Change Leadership course run by the said business school at the University of Oxford. And since 2007 up to the present, Barrett has spearheaded the Barrett Values Centre's work in mapping the values of over 20 nations. Maureen Watson is the co-founder of the UK Values Alliance, whose vision is to put values at the heart of society. Its formation in January of 2013 followed the results from the 2012 Barrett Values Centre UK National Values Assessment that showed a large disparity between the personal values of people in the United Kingdom and those they saw in their culture. She believes awareness helps us to make conscious changes in our lives. For example, to live and work based on our values. She sees developing awareness as key to giving up these choices and, being so fundamental, chose this as her contribution to a World Book of Values. Underlying developing awareness is, for Watson, meditation. Being introduced to this practice and making it a regular part of her life led to her career change from industrial chemist to financial services advisor, and then to her becoming a personal and business development consulting, incorporating the teaching of Kundalini yoga and meditation. And Danae Johnson, as the founder and principal of Thinking Partners, her focus is creating positive change and greater work and life fulfillment for both individual leaders and whole organizations. She has witnessed the most significant shifts when leaders make time to expand their level of awareness, their impact on others, and the culture of their organizations and communities. Through her work at Thinking Partners and a small group of selected partners, Danae has improved business results and leadership capacity through coaching, strategic human resource practices, and values-based cultural transformation. She recently co-authored the article A Values-Based Culture Takes One Company from Good to Great for HR Voice, and she's also the co-author of a World Book of Values with chapters on sense of community and rest. Danae is based in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada. Richard Barrett, Maureen Watson and Danae Johnson join me today in this episode 2 of the long-term series, The Values-Driven Life at Home and Work, at DG Networks, a member of Universal One Broadcasting. Welcome back to the long-term series, Living a Values-Driven Life at Home and Work, with Richard Barrett, Chairman and Founder of the Barrett Values Centre, Maureen Watson of the UK Values Alliance, and Danae Johnson, today co-author of the World Book of Values under Rest and Sense of Community, and of course, the company Thinking Partners. I'd like to start with yourself, if I may, Richard. Welcome.
Thank you, David. Lovely to be with you.
And Maureen Watson. Maureen, it's a pleasure to have you back again.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Danae Johnson. Danae, also a great pleasure.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Richard, I'd like to hand over to you, if I may, to start this out. We're talking about the PVA, Personal Values Assessment. Maureen Watson talking to that in specifically, and then, of course, talking to Danae regarding her pieces in the World Book of Values. How would you like to start talking to the values of perhaps Maureen, Richard?
Well, I'd just like to remind our listeners that if you've listened to the previous programs, you will realize that you can carry out a free personal values assessment by going to valuescenter.com/PVA. And we've been talking about people's personal values and exploring how they bring these values to their lives, both at home and work. In our last session, we heard from Maureen, and I thought it would be a good idea for us to explore her values, and she very kindly agreed to allow that to happen. So David, the plan at the moment would be to talk to Maureen about the values, the top 10 values in her life, and find out more about who she is based on this personal values assessment, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely super, Richard. And just as the last programs, if I may, just ask Maureen, before we do that, Maureen, abbreviated background of yourself for our listeners, if you could.
Thank you, David. Don't know how far back listeners would want me to go, but I'll just take the salient points. I trained as a chemist, which was definitely a square peg in a round hole, but being a pretty determined person, I wanted to leave school at the first opportunity and go to university, so I didn't give myself time to think about anything other than what I was good at school. So chose chemistry, worked as a chemist for a number of years, and had always an inclination to have my own business, and eventually became self-employed as a financial advisor. When I was a chemist, perhaps because I was a square peg in a round hole and had too many responsibilities at a very young age, I developed stress and was prescribed tranquilizers, which are rather strange. For those that have been on tranquilizers, they'll know what I'm talking about. So replaced them pretty quickly with meditation, and that led to eventually a complete change of direction when I sold my financial services business in 2000 and began to focus much more on heart work related to values, corporate culture transformation, yoga, Reiki, and the teaching of meditation. And that eventually led to the being part of the UK National Values Assessment run by the Barrett Values Centre, and then subsequently co-founding the UK Values Alliance. So meditation was and is a very important part of my life, and as you'll have heard, changed it quite dramatically.
Maureen, thank you so much for that. And I will move on, if I may, to Danae Johnson. Danae, first appearance on the program. Would you kindly provide a abbreviated background as well for our listeners?
For sure, thank you. And I have to say, in listening to your story, there's many elements of that I can relate to. My background's in human resources, and my education was in communication. And for 11 years, I worked in an organization that was quite large. It had up to 25,000 employees in its prime, and it was involved in real estate and resort development all over North America, and then moving into Europe as well. And it was an amazing experience, and I was able to get a lot of good leadership experience there. And my last role there was the Vice President of People Development on the real estate side of the business. And I have a lot of appreciation for that experience. At the same time, that is where I experienced some real disconnects that actually got me into the work that I'm doing more so today. One of the things that we were doing there was building $2 and $3 million townhomes for people's second and third homes. And there was a part of that just didn't really started not to resonate with me in terms of how is this truly making the world a better place given where the world was at and is at currently. And so part of that was to start to do some much deeper inner work to explore what then would make a difference and what then is important and really meaningful to me. And it was actually through all of that that I got into coaching. So I wanted to work more deeply and closely with leaders in organizations to discover what meant most to them. And then through that work was actually how I met Richard. I was introduced by a colleague of mine when Richard was actually in Vancouver, and learned a bit more about values-based culture work and how to actually measure culture in organizations, because that was also one of the things that was really important to me, was how to measure and evaluate this somewhat nebulous culture in organizations. And so the cultural transformation tools were something that I got really involved with, certified in, and have been using that ever since, both in organizations and also with individual coaching clients.
Danae, thank you so very much for that. I was interested there. Danae talked about people development, perhaps worth taking up on towards the latter part of the program, but hand it over to you, Richard, if I may.
Well, thank you, David. So let's put Maureen under the microscope, the values microscope. Maureen completed her personal values assessment, and I have it here in front of me. She kindly agreed to share it with the world. That takes a lot of courage, Maureen. And when I look at this personal values assessment, I see top 10 values spread through all of the different levels of consciousness except the highest level. In other words, I see one value at the survival level, two values at the relationship level, two values at the self-esteem level, one value at the transformation level, three values at the internal cohesion, and one at the making a difference level. And so what this says to me is that you are a person who is well on the way to becoming what I call a full spectrum individual. You're just really missing one value at that seventh level to achieve this, I want to say status, but that's not the right word, achieve this level of enlightenment. Because somebody who operates at all levels of consciousness is somebody who can handle pretty much any situation which arises, especially when those values are all positive values. If we were talking about potentially limiting values, then in the lower levels, then that would not be the case. So here we have Maureen, who is pretty much a full spectrum individual, can handle almost anything that comes along. And that is actually my experience of you, Maureen. And so how would you respond to that designation that I've given you?
I would respond with gratitude. Thank you for that delightful description. I think probably it's pretty accurate, although I did get surprised when I saw the result that it was so spread over all the levels. But I would say that where I am at this stage in life, probably the service level is the one that is the next to move into, if not being touched upon already, as the co-founder of the UK Values Alliance. And I think regarding coping, what is thrown at me that people that know me well would probably say that was pretty true. So thank you.
So what I see also, you have these three values at the fifth level of consciousness, which really corresponds to the self-actualization stage of psychological development. And that stage is all about finding your passion or your gifts and your talents and making them available. And that's at the next level, at the sixth level, where your value at that level is well-being, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. In other words, you're taking care of all of those different needs as you take your gifts, which are very meaningful to you, and you make them available to the world through the work that you're doing. And I know that work is very much involved with the UK Values Alliance. Well, we'll come to that point in a moment. I'm intrigued by the first value at the survival level, which you indicate is self-discipline. So talk to us about self-discipline in your life.
I think that relates quite a lot to order. I like a fair degree of order in my life just because I find it makes life simpler. So I'm not a person that doesn't have a routine. I'm not a person that readily loses or doesn't know where to find things. And all of that just releases me to get on with what I think is important. So also coupled with that, I would say that I do like to achieve. I consciously think about my life, what I'm doing in my life, how I'm going to feel when I reflect on it. And so it takes a good degree of self-discipline to actually keep focused on what I do want to achieve. So I think all of that is wrapped up in self-discipline.
Yes, self-discipline. I agree with you and your interpretation of it. That's what it means to me too. It means that I get everything done that I need to get done, and I take care of whatever I need to take care of, which gives me the opportunity to spend my life focusing on what I love to do. It reminds me very much of the results of what's called a longitudinal prospective study that was done, started in around 1920s and went on until just a few years ago, where they followed the lives of a large number of people. This was done, so research done by Stanford University. And as they look back on this study, which collected data from people all the way through their lives as they grew and evolved, the researchers wrote a book about the results. And the key area that they looked at, it was the question of longevity, how long you live. And what was clear from this study was that the key factor in creating longevity, helping us to have a long life, was conscientiousness. I would never have guessed that, but that's what it came up with. But then I thought about it. It made a lot of sense and totally links to this idea of self-discipline, conscientiousness, bringing order and taking care of things as you need to. Don't let things get out of hand. If you're having a relationship issue, tackle it. Don't let things fester, but just keep on tackling problems as they come up. It seems to me that you did that also, because here you are, a chemist, and suddenly realizing that wasn't working for you, so you didn't let that drag on. You dealt with it.
Absolutely correct, yes. Because I enjoy life a lot and want to carry on doing that and like to be doing that in the moment, then if there is anything to be approached that needs changing, then I will do that. But I'm also smiling, Richard, at the word conscientious, because I remember seeing that on my report card as a child. So obviously it's a very inherent part of this person, Maureen Watson.
Yeah, and what that says, according to this report, this study, is you're going to live a long life, Maureen. And I think, just looking at you and how vital you are, I'm sure that's going to be true. So let's move on to a couple of other values that were important for you at the second level, which was listening.
Listening's a really funny one, because I remember that I used to be a persistent question asker. When I met people, I quickly wanted to ask them no end of questions so that I could discover all about them. And then at some point along my journey, I think when I became more a meditative person, I realized that information comes to you that you need when you need it. And so I stopped asking people questions and discovered that it was a much more relaxed approach, and more relaxing for other people too, I'm sure, if you actually listened. And so I think being a psychotherapist at one point, listening was a very important quality to have in that job. But I also find that it's actually much more rich if you give people space to talk and you listen, not just hear, but you listen. And so listening, I would think people, again, who know me well would say that that is something I've improved upon as the years have gone by.
Well, I think that's true for all of us. We when we're younger, we're a bit full of ourselves, and we tend to project that fullness out into the world. And later on, we learn to listen, because that builds connection. And listening also has this other wonderful advantage, is that the person you're listening to not just feels heard, but feels seen. They feel that they are talking to somebody who gets who they are, because that deep listening allows you to make linkages between things that they're saying and respond back in a way that they feel not just heard but seen as well. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Yes, very much so. I think it deepens empathy. And the other thing that I found, Richard, is that because of this order that we were talking about a while ago in this conversation, I can have a tendency to want to order things for other people too when they seem to be in some sort of trouble because they're not ordered. And I've realized that this fixing is not a good approach. And I tend to have more awareness and hopefully consciousness around just letting people speak sometimes, because the main support that you can give them is just to listen. And as you've just said, so that they know they're heard. They don't necessarily need to be fixed. I'm not saying that isn't still in my nature, but I think I have more awareness around it and hopefully do less of it.
Well, welcome to the world of men, Maureen. Yeah, we like to fix things, no matter what's going on. And it's quite a steep learning curve for us to understand that sometimes our partners, our female partners, let me put it that way, just want to talk about whatever's going on, and that's enough. We don't have to fix anything. And just the listening releases the tension and allows the connection. So let's move on to the next level, where your two values are efficiency and reliability. And again, I think the efficiency links back to the whole idea of self-discipline, and the reliability in a way, in an interesting way, links back to listening, because, when you listen to people, you know what they want, and you can provide that, and you can be depended on, which is like being reliable.
Yes, I also think they're necessary aspects when you're running your own business, especially in the businesses that I have run since I stopped being a chemist, which was financial services. So it's really important that you listen there and that you are reliable and efficient in the advice that you're giving and the actions you subsequently take. And even moving into being a co-founder of the UK Values Alliance, I think the values of reliability and efficiency are needed there, so we actually achieve what we want to achieve in our vision.
Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. What I also noticed at the fourth level of consciousness, you've got continuous learning, and which says to me, look, I'm open. I'm open to whatever is happening. And continuous learning says to me adaptability. Because learning is always emergent in a sense in life, because you never know what's coming around the corner, and you learn by the results that you get. And so continuous learning can be a pain, frankly, because it never ends. But it is a really, really important value, I would suggest, for people to have in their lives. And you seem to have that. What's your biggest learning about life that you could share with us, Maureen?
Biggest learning about life, okay, is to know yourself well so that you play to your strengths, learn how you can contribute most to the world, which I remember consciously thinking about. And I also think the other aspect, having hopefully answered your question, Richard, I would just add that the other aspect for me of continuous learning is that it keeps life exciting for me.
Yes, keeps you on your toes and always open to the new things.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a big appetite for living, which is why I'm glad that you think I'm going to have a long life.
Chiming in here, Richard, continuous listening. I noticed that you talked to adaptability, but you didn't mention transformation.
the continuous learning occurs at the transformational level, because without this idea of continuous learning, you don't transform. You get stuck. You get stuck in who you are, and find it difficult to move forward. You don't see the difficulties in your life, or let me put it this way, the pain in your life as a gift. Pain can be a supreme gift which says, look, I'm out of alignment. It's telling you you're out of alignment, ego out of alignment with soul, and the feedback is pain. And when you get pain, you say, oh my God, what is not working here? Because if the pain is an energetic sign of misalignment, and so picking up on that immediately gets you into the continuous learning mode.
So can I just follow up before you continue, Richard? Stuck in who you are. Can I go back one step? And Maureen and yourself were talking about fixing, and I'm immediately thinking of a fulcrum where you have listening on one end of the fulcrum and enabling on the other. Could it be that if you do not perfect your art of listening, that you could become an enabler instead of somebody who is truly seeing the person in front of you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because there is a certain balance there. I have an interesting little story on that one, which involves it involves the world of the World Bank, where I used to be, and it actually wasn't a story about the World Bank. It was more about one of the bilateral nations who were giving aid, and they wanted to give a sum of money to a country somewhere in the Middle East. Oh, I believe it was India, actually. So they said, look, we've done our analysis, and what we think you need is a road to your remote village. And the people said, we might need a road, but what we really want is a temple, because we don't have a temple in our village. And we would really much prefer to have the temple than the road. So they built a road. They could not enable these villagers to build a temple because it didn't fit within their criteria. So no listening and no enabling. So I think you're right that these two things do fit together very well.
In that case, Richard, then, as part of that enabling, would that include over-perfection? Because there can be a negative connotation with perfection that goes beyond discipline, that becomes out of balance in that enabling. Where would you go with that word perfection, just to create some clarity as far as a value?
Perfection, enabling, and fixing other people all seem to be a nexus of values that we've been talking about, because, fits very nicely with my story, is that your perception of perfection is not necessarily the perception of other people. And so we all view the world through the lenses of the stage of psychological development we're at, and the stage we're at is a reflection of the need that we have. And so perfection can take you too far, in the sense that you spend an inordinate amount of energy getting to perfection, where need to, you could spend 20% of that energy and get to something that really works, and spend the other 80% getting to perfection. And that's not a good use of energy, in my opinion, because practice does bring perfection. And so just seeking perfection for its own good can have a downside. I know when I write my books, I'll write a whole chapter, I'll go over it, I'll polish it, I'll go over and polish it again, I'll write a few more chapters, I'll go back and polish all the chapters again, check them out. But there comes a time when you have to stop polishing and say, look, hey, now that's good enough. Because all of the extra energy I'm going to spend now could be wasted. There may be other things to do. So that's one of the ways of looking at perfection. I'd like to ask Maureen if she relates to being a perfectionist. I'm not sure she does, but she is, as she points out, very efficient and reliable, and in that sense must have a sense of, well, I have to apply myself to this and make sure if it's not 100%, it's 99%.
Yes, Richard, I definitely identify with perfectionism. I think, though, I've got that more in balance. I think earlier in my life, I might have been doing things with a view that they had to be perfect, but now I've got a more balanced approach and say that's good enough. But I like things that I'm involved in and surrounded by to be as good as I can make it. And I remember there was a Buddhist, I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh, that said if you're doing something and you've chosen to do it, then do it to the best of your ability. And so that I will do, but I know that just practical circumstances sometimes result in my having to say that's good enough. And that's fine.
So let's finish off your values assessment. What I see now are three values at the internal cohesion level, which is enthusiasm, generosity, and trust. And these are wonderful values to have. Out of these three, there's enthusiasm, generosity, and trust. Which of them would you place highest out of that trio?
I'd say trust.
Yes, trust is an end value, and there are many other values that lead to trust. And when you finally get to trust, you've already put in place quite a number of other values, reliability being one of them. You can't trust somebody who's not reliable. That's absolutely true. But talk to me about generosity. That's one of your values. How does that show up in your life?
I think it's realizing that I have all that I need in my life, and so I'm in the fortunate position of being able to share what I have with others. And I like to be generous to friends and family, just to bring the joy that can bring. I think there's in me more of an experience of joy in giving than receiving. Not that it's not nice to do both, but yeah, I like to be generous and to give to others. And I've had that experience just at the weekend past, where a friend of mine who certainly has a lot less positive going on in their life than I do, was able to share a lovely weekend with them and generously give, and it seemed to benefit them hugely. So that's very positive and very welcomed.
Isn't that amazing how when you're generous, it benefits you? And, and there's a deep spiritual reason for that. And that reason is that at the soul level, we're all not just interconnected, we're all aspects of the same energy field. And so when I give to you, I'm giving to myself. And there is no greater joy than giving to yourself. I mean, I'm making a joke of that, but it's true. You feel the joy comes from the gift. You give the gift, but you receive the gift when you recognize that we're all connected at a deeper level or energetic level. And so why wouldn't I give to you in order to give myself pleasure? That's at least the way I look at it.
And I understand that totally.
And so, Richard, can I just ask you, you haven't mentioned the word productivity. You talked about reliability, we've talked about perfection, but we didn't talk about productivity in terms of longevity. I think that's interesting because in my own life, I spent 2 or 3 years when I began in this work, where I would work 18 hours a day, burn myself out and be completely unproductive, and then switch to a day where it would be 5 hours of very intensive work and be extremely productive.
Well, productivity wasn't one of Maureen's values, but as you put that, clearly, I'm sure we'll get Maureen to talk about this, but productivity is measuring output against energy. In other words, more output, less energy is highly productive. And we very much started this whole conversation by talking about self-discipline. Well, self-discipline is about getting stuff done and out of the way so that you can be more productive. And do you consider yourself to be productive, Maureen?
Highly productive, I'd say, but I can identify too with what David said. I think there's more productivity goes on when you concentrate and condense what you're doing into a shorter time. And I think also having that awareness about your mind and your body too, becoming tired and knowing the best times to actually be productive.
Yeah, I really associate with that. I try to keep, to the extent that I can, my mornings free because I know by 2 o'clock I'm going to be a little sleepy and might need to close my eyes for an hour or two. Oh, well, an hour anyhow. And so I then tend to arrange my meetings and other things for the late afternoon because, that's the most productive use of my time, keeping the mornings free for my writing and the afternoons free for connecting. Before we finish, Maureen, I'd like you to, and then we'll move on to Danae, I wanted to ask you to talk about one aspect of the UK Values Alliance. I know you've got a number of projects underway right now. I wondered if you would like to talk about one of those projects and tell us what's going on in the UK Values Alliance at the moment and how people might sign up and become part of that.
Thank you for that opportunity. I really appreciate that. One of the main projects that I'm involved in is the Wake Up to Values project. And this was a creative idea put forward by one of the members, Charles Fowler. And right from day one, which was sometime back now, I just thought that was a terrific idea for getting the word out there and raising the awareness of how positive it can be to live and work based on values. So we've completed a number of pilots now, probably have one more to do that involves the private sector, and then we're hoping to roll this out across the UK and beyond. Certainly the feedback that we've had for this project, which has been, as I say, across a number of organisations, is very positive and has encouraged us to keep on moving forward with it. And there's an up-to-date report on the website valuesalliance.net for people that would like to learn more about this and get involved in it.
Well, just take one moment to tell us, is this a one-day intervention? What does it actually look like?
It's an intervention that takes 4 sessions, and they're normally about a month apart. So it's quite a long-term intervention, which is necessary because it gives people the opportunity to select the values that are important for them personally and also within their organization. And what I think is really key is to write behavior statements aligned to their top 5 values and then put them into action. And we support them in that and then follow up and see how they've been doing with their actions and help them to move these forward both within their organizations but then out with the organization into the community. That has been working very well. What we then do is after the 4 sessions are complete over a period of about 4 months, we then have a 3-month follow-up, 3 months after the 4th session, and then a 6-month follow-up, and that really helps to embed the learning.
How long are each of these 4 interventions that make up the program?
Usually 2 to 3 hours for each session.
Oh, okay.
And similarly for the 3-month follow-up that can be done over the telephone or face-to-face, and then the 6-month follow-up is a similar length of time, but that is done face-to-face.
And are you doing this not just in organization, but in communities also, or schools? Is that on your agenda?
It's on the agenda to do it within a university. We haven't done it within a school, and it's not on the agenda at the moment to do it in a school, but certainly such groups could be part of the rollout. No reason for that not being the case.
Good. Well, let's turn our attention to Danae. Have you got something to add at this moment, David?
The only thing I would say is that the natural segue to Danae is her work on rest in the World Book of Values, because rest to me suggests both listening and productivity.
And so why do you mention the word rest?
Rest is something that Danae has written to in the book, the World Book of Values.
Oh, well, Danae, tell us about the meaning of rest to you and why you felt drawn to write about that.
Yeah, so the 2 that I picked for the World Book of Values was rest and also sense of community. And I would say rest was not something I would have picked 10 years ago. I think there's a piece in there where I could probably connect it to some of my other values as well, to where I wouldn't have had as much space for it or value for it. And I think, I think there's a connection there with, when I heard Maureen talk about listening and making space for others. I think there's a piece with rest where it's slowing things down enough to create some space to allow all of what we're taking in on such a often frantic pace to actually integrate within us, within our minds, within our hearts, kind of in our whole being. I also think a key piece to that is this idea of restoring and rejuvenating. And there are many ways to do that. Maureen was talking about meditation. That's a practice that in the last 10 years it's become more a part of my life. Again, something I wouldn't have made space for before that. It just didn't seem like doing a whole lot of nothing. And I'm learning or seeing the value more and more of, all the productivity and the energy we put out into the world, of balancing that with letting things integrate, but also just being really conscious of the fact that we only have so much energy. And I guess I could probably even put that we only have so much time here. And so we need to I want to be more intentional and more thoughtful about how I use that energy. I want to be wiser about that. And I think one of the things that rest does is it allows us time to choose more wisely, to recognize that we only have so much of it, and also to restore what we're giving away. So it's something that I value more and more, whereas previously that just I would not have had a lot of space for it. I would have been so much more focused on getting things done, which I still do. I still have a focus on that, but maybe with a little bit more selectivity around that, and hopefully awareness and consciousness around it.
Richard, may I just ask you, is this indicative of an individual who has met and passed the self-actualization stage?
Well, David, that is absolutely correct. And it's so interesting that we're talking about this, because the day after tomorrow, I'm giving a keynote speech at ISADE Business School in Barcelona on the spiritual dimensions of creativity. And what is really interesting is that if you're working from ego, and I'm saying if you're working from ego levels, not self-interest, but just ego levels, you're creative you bring people together and you have a brain's trust and you put all the ideas down and then you pick the best one and then you move with that. And that's what creativity is from an ego perspective at those lower levels of consciousness. Now, creativity, on the other hand, from the higher levels of consciousness is very different. And you'll get the connection to what Danae is talking about right here, because from the soul level, or from the spiritual level, creativity arises. You see there's an issue and you reflect and think about it, and then you let it be. You rest. Mm-hmm. And then in the background, you give your soul the opportunity to work through that and come forward with ideas, which then you receive at some point in the future, having rested. So you're not fretting and striving. Creativity becomes easy because you let your soul do it in the background, and then these wonderful ideas pop through and you think, wow, yeah, that's the solution to that one. And so rest plays a fundamental role in the higher levels of creativity, or creating from the higher levels of consciousness. So does that resonate with your experience, Danae?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to be embarrassed if I've misquoted this, which is a good chance I have here, but I think it was Albert Einstein that had said that creativity is a byproduct, an accidental byproduct of wasted time. So, yeah.
Well, you have to look a bit deeper into that to get it, but I totally get it. What he's saying is that he was saying that, when you're not focused on driving and driving forward, in other words, you're having fun and relaxing, it's a byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, Danae talked about energy, and I've written down being able to understand what excess energy is. You've talked to it so much in our programs, being able to finesse that so that we can create that excess energy and transfer it into creativity. And I wonder if when Danae said restoring what we're giving away, that is part of that process.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think there is something here to this idea that, yeah, that we have to let go, we have to stop, we have to rest and let go of control in order to see what maybe some of the possibilities are that we haven't even considered yet. And in doing that, then there may be some new soil for us to turn, some new insights that can help us with creativity going forward. And hopefully that creativity, what comes in those moments, may be some things that actually help us make our lives better, make the world a better place, maybe ultimately. So yeah, I think there is a connection between all of that.
Richard, that's great, isn't it? Because you do talk about harnessing excess energy to create productivity as well as creativity in our series. So this is really important, is it not, to understand this very well, how it works?
We need to understand what excess energy. It's the energy that you get. I sometimes refer to it in a working perspective as discretionary energy. It's the energy that we choose to bring to the things that we're passionate about, and so channeling that energy into what we're passionate about is hugely beneficial, not just for ourselves, but for the projects that we have. I'd like to ask Danae about the other value that she wrote about, but just a brief footnote here. I just posted on slideshare.net, that's all one word, slideshare.net, /Barrett values. I just posted the whole presentation on spiritual and psychological dimensions of creativity and flow. So if you want to see that presentation of 63 slides, I couldn't get, it's really hard for me to get anything down below 100. So honestly, I did really well here, but I can present 63 slides in like 30 minutes. But you can see that presentation at slideshare.net /Barrett values. Danae, tell us, what is the other value you chose to put in the World Book of Values?
The other one was sense of community. So this one I remember thinking quite a lot about where to come at this, because there seemed to me to be so many different perspectives and angles on it. One of the things, I think at the time when I was writing this, or when this project came on board, so that was maybe 3 years ago. I think it all started before it went to print, and there was a piece in there where I realized that I've had a sense of community feel very alive in my life. And I've also had it where, and at the time this was the case, where I felt a greater absence of it. And both of those, and probably several levels in between, helped me to understand what it is for me in my life and around me. And where I live in Vancouver, I live right beside Stanley Park. It's a beautiful spot. There's a lot of people who, like many big cities, who live outside permanently, are homeless, live on the streets, and by Stanley Park, there's a lot of people who actually live in the park. I know that when I first moved back to Vancouver after living in a very small community for 10 years with less than 10,000 people as a population, I moved back into this big city and felt really challenged around having a sense of community, which I thought was funny, given that I was surrounded by now millions of people and yet felt more isolated than I had the last 10 years. And the people who lived all around me, including people who I realized were not living in homes but living outside, just really opened my eyes to how much they, of course, were a part of this community. I don't think that they're always treated that way, but that just really started to shift my perspective on looking at the whole community, not just the parts of it where there's maybe some like-mindedness, but what from A to Z and all of its diversity creates us that sense of community. And so it was one particular person named Ed who was a homeless person who just had a profound impact not only on me but on hundreds and hundreds of people that lived in this neighborhood that I thought really spoke to me about epitomizing, demonstrating, just truly living what I think is the spirit of community. And it wasn't really until after he passed away and how I learned that he had passed away was there's just this spot on the street where he spent 60, 70, 80% of his time. And one day I went to go by, and instead of him being there, there was this growing mound of flowers. People were just continuing to bring flowers in honor of him because the word got out that he had passed away. And by the time, after several weeks and people had heard about this, the mound of flowers was incredible. It was massive, and actually part of that there was also people were placing brooms there as well because he was always contributing to our community by sweeping. And nobody asked him to do it. He never asked for money for it, but it was something that he could do. It was one of the things that he had a sense of responsibility for. It was a gift he shared with us without being asked. And I actually find myself as I'm talking about this, I can really feel it. That he instilled this sense of community without even knowing it to so many of us, I think, who think we're doing work in community, which we are, which many people are, but in a much more formal way or a structured way. And there's such a broader, I think, definition and meaning to what sense of community really is.
So I must ask you, Richard, this individual, Ed, that Danae talks about, where's he at? He has to be, despite the fact that he doesn't have the many vehicles in his life, he's not in the modern world, I would suggest. He doesn't have a bank account, he doesn't have a job, but he's surpassed that, has he not, to the point where he's in full service? That is perhaps more typical than we could imagine, because I've seen many of these people in Los Angeles underneath the highways.
Well, there are many first thoughts. First of all, Danae, what a touching story that was. And here's an example of somebody who had very, very little, but found a way to give his gift. And his gift touched hundreds of people. And you can see that by the outpouring of love through the flowers. And so it points to me that you may not have very many material possessions, but we all have gifts to give. It also reminds me of the street cleaner in my street, who whenever I see him, I always talk to him and tell him how lovely the street is thanks to him. And these people don't get acknowledged as being part of the community, but speaking to him and listening to him comes back to what Maureen was talking about, that he feels seen. And, he's doing a very conscientious job of keeping our street clean. And I love that. I love the fact that he keeps our street clean. And so I really like this idea, Danae, that you have, that everybody in the community is contributing to that community in different ways. And we tend to not see that. We tend to, live our own little lives and fail to see that. So what a gift that value has brought to our program today. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And I must ask you, as we close towards the end of the program, Danae, I am part of all that I have met. You cite there Alfred Tennyson. Just open that up a bit for our listeners.
I think that captures this idea that, formally and informally, all of the experiences that we've had, some that we are no longer part of, and maybe they were quite seemingly insignificant at that time, but that we bring all of that with us. There's this sense that all of those experiences add to who we are as a person, and to know that other people that you're meeting in your communities, outside of your communities, do the same. I think it speaks to the depth and breadth that we have as individuals, and then all of that depth and breadth that then comes in as a community. Again, whether it's a formal community, an informal community, whether it's a local one or a global one. But that there's that, it really speaks to that connection that we really are all one.
Danae, thank you so much. I will start with yourself, if I may, Maureen Watson. Maureen, your final thoughts for the program today.
I just think this is such a wonderful opportunity, connecting like this and doing these programs, and to hear such touching stories as Danae has just shared, and to have Richard's time giving us his wisdom on, be it our PVAs or what we've had to say during the program, is such a wonderful opportunity too. So thank you also, David, for your great efficiency in running and facilitating these programs, and thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share today. So I hope that the people who are listening get a lot from what has been said, and just wish to thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this.
Maureen, thank you so much. And Danae Johnson. Danae, your final thoughts as we close towards the end of our journey today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure to be part of this conversation, and to hear, Maureen, you talk so openly about your values and Richard's insights around that. I guess what I'm really leaving with is, there's a part of me that knows this, but the reminder of this for the last 60 minutes of the value and the importance of and the impact of the dialogue about values, dialogue about what matters to us most, and how we are living these things. That I'm reminded of the importance of that.
Deep dialogue, that's what we're all about. Richard, your final conclusions for the day, if you may.
Well, David, what a splendid hour we've spent together in deep sharing. I've been very touched by both Maureen's and Danae's stories, and it just brings home to me the whole idea of the importance of values in our lives, and the stories that we can weave around our values, and the benefits that these values bring to us through the sharing of stories. And the thought that comes to me as we come to the end of the program is that I know about a homeless person called Ed who lived in Vancouver, who touched the world around him by sweeping the street because that's what he could contribute. And now thousands and thousands of other people have been touched by Ed. All the people listening into this, Ed just multiplied his impact in the world in a major way, and so he's not forgotten. He's like a superhero of the homeless. We can rejoice in this new superhero who never expected and would turn in his grave if he realized that he was being listened and talked about, and thousands of people all over the world were hearing his story.
That's amazing.
It is quite amazing. And that does bring us to the end of the program today. A wonderful dialogue. Richard, I will start with yourself. Thank you so very much. A great privilege.
Thank you, David.
And to Maureen Watson, as ever. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
And finally, Danae Johnson. Danae, it has been extraordinary. We're so thankful for your participation.
Oh, thank you. I'm absolutely honored. That was just the best hour to spend today ever. Thank you all.
And to our listeners today, that was the long-term series, Living a Values-Driven Life at Home and Work, episode 2 in the series. We do hope that you enjoyed this as much as we. You can find information on this and all of the official websites for our participants at davidgibbons.org, or for internationally facilitated panels, crossingoverthebridge.com. Meanwhile, we'll wish you a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this world.